My grandson cried every single time he left my house. Not the normal kind of crying, not the pouty lip. I don't want to go home kind that kids do when they've been eating too much ice cream and staying up past their bedtime. This was different. This was the kind of crying that came from somewhere deep, somewhere a child shouldn't even know exists yet. He would wrap both arms around my neck, press his face into my shoulder, and shake. 9 years old, and he shook like he was terrified of something he couldn't name. I'm 67 years old. I spent 31 years as a civil engineer, raised 2 kids mostly on my own after my wife Margaret passed, and I've seen enough of the world to know when something is wrong. And something was very wrong with my grandson Danny. My son Kevin is 41, good man, always has been. A little too trusting, maybe. A little too quick to see the best in people, which is a quality I admire and worry about in equal measure. He married his second wife, Renee, about 3 years ago. Danny is from Kevin's first marriage. His mother, Kevin's ex-wife, Carol, moved to Portland for work 2 years back, and they'd agreed Danny would spend the school year with Kevin and summers with Carol. I thought it was a reasonable arrangement. I thought everything was fine. Then I started noticing the crying. At first I told myself it was just the transition. Kids need time to adjust. But months went by and it didn't get better. It got worse. Danny would come spend the weekend with me at my house out in Clarksburg, Maryland, just 20 minutes from Kevin's place. And for the first few hours he'd be stiff, quiet, careful, like he was waiting for something bad to happen. Then slowly, over Saturday afternoon, he'd start to loosen up. We'd work on the model trains in my basement. We'd grill burgers in the backyard. We'd watch old westerns that he pretended to find boring but secretly loved. By Saturday night, he'd be laughing, sprawled on the couch, the tension gone from his little shoulders. And then Sunday afternoon would come, and Kevin would pull into my driveway, and I would watch the light go out of Danny's eyes. I asked him once, gently, sitting on the back porch with lemonade between us. I said, "Hey, bud, you doing okay at home?" He looked at his glass for a long time. Then he said, "Yeah, Grandpa, I'm fine." He said it the way adults say it when they're not fine at all. I didn't push. I didn't want to scare him, but I started paying closer attention. I noticed he flinched sometimes when his stepmother's name came up in conversation. Just a small thing. A quick tightening around the eyes, a barely perceptible pull of the shoulders inward. I noticed he never talked about her the way kids talk about the adults in their lives. Never mentioned anything she'd said or done, good or bad, as if he'd made a decision somewhere inside himself to keep that part of his life completely separate, completely hidden. I noticed that when Kevin called to check in on Sundays, Danny's voice changed, became flatter, more careful. I mentioned it to Kevin once, casually, not wanting to alarm him. I said Renee seemed like a fine woman, but I wondered if Danny was having a hard time adjusting. Kevin got a little defensive. Not angry, just that particular kind of defensive that tells you the person has already had this thought and pushed it away. He said Danny was great, Renee was great, they were all adjusting together, and I should not worry. I tried not to worry. Then came the Saturday in October. Danny had been quiet all weekend, quieter than usual. He barely touched his food at dinner. He sat next to me on the couch watching television, but I could feel the tension radiating off him like heat. When I turned off the TV at 9 and told him it was time for bed, he stood up slowly and just stood there in the middle of my living room, not moving, looking at the floor. I said, "Danny, what is it?" He didn't answer for a moment. Then he walked over to me. And this part I will never forget for as long as I live. He reached into the pocket of his hoodie and pulled out a small folded piece of paper and pressed it into my hand. He looked up at me with eyes that were too old for his face, and he said, very quietly, "Don't read it until I'm asleep, Grandpa, please." Then he went upstairs. I sat in that living room for 20 minutes with that folded piece of paper in my fist. I listened to the house settle around me. I listened to the sound of water running upstairs, the toilet flushing, the creak of the guest bed as Danny got in. I waited until the house was fully quiet. Then I opened the note. His handwriting was careful and small, the way kids write when they're trying very hard to be neat. It said, "Grandpa, look in the blue box in your workshop, the one behind the old paint cans. I hid something there 2 weeks ago. I think something bad is going to happen. I'm scared. Please don't tell them I told you. I love you." I read it 3 times. Then I folded it back up and put it in my shirt pocket, right over my heart, and I sat very still for a long time. My workshop is a detached garage at the back of my property. I built half of it myself back in 2009, the year after Margaret died, when I needed something to do with my hands. It's where I keep my woodworking equipment, my tools, about 40 years worth of accumulated hardware, and a wall of shelves along the back covered in old paint cans, mason jars of screws and nails, and various boxes of things I keep meaning to sort through. I knew exactly which blue box Danny meant. It was an old metal tackle box of mine, faded, with a broken latch, that had been sitting on that shelf for at least 5 years. I didn't go out to the workshop that night. I made myself wait. I don't entirely know why. Some instinct told me I needed to be calm and deliberate, not reactive. I made a cup of tea. I sat at my kitchen table. I thought about my grandson's face when he handed me that note, the way he looked at me, the weight of trust in that look, the weight of fear. I went out to the workshop at 6 in the morning, before Danny was awake. The Maryland autumn was just starting to bite, and my breath fogged in the cold air as I crossed the backyard. I unlocked the workshop, went to the back shelf, moved 3 paint cans aside, and pulled out the blue tackle box. Inside, I found a small spiral notebook. Pink, with a cartoon cat on the cover, the kind you'd find in the dollar section at Target. Danny must have taken it from somewhere. I opened it. The handwriting inside was not Danny's. It was small, precise, and adult, and what it contained made me set the notebook down on my workbench, step back, and press both hands flat against the wood, because I needed something solid to hold on to. It was a financial record. Detailed, systematic, covering the past 14 months. Account numbers, transaction dates, withdrawal amounts, and next to several entries in a different pen, small notations, Kevin doesn't know. Transfer complete. Check cleared before statement. There were 2 names I didn't recognize alongside a series of transfers totaling, as far as I could calculate standing there in my cold workshop at 6 in the morning, somewhere in the range of $60,000. Kevin's accounts, Kevin's money, and on the last page, written in the same precise hand, a note to no one in particular. If the old man becomes a problem, there are other ways to handle it. He's already showing signs. It won't take much. I stood in that workshop for a long time. Then I went back inside, made breakfast, and when Danny came downstairs, I smiled at him and said good morning and asked if he wanted pancakes, and I did not say a single word about the notebook. But when he sat down at the table and looked at me across the kitchen, I held his gaze and gave him one small nod so he would know. He exhaled, this long, shaking breath, and I understood that he had been holding that breath for 2 weeks. "Pancakes sound great, Grandpa," he said. After Kevin picked Danny up that afternoon, I sat down at my kitchen table and thought carefully about what I knew and what I didn't know and what I needed to do. What I knew, Renee had been systematically transferring money from Kevin's accounts. She had been doing it for over a year. She had been doing it carefully, in amounts small enough not to trigger automatic alerts, spread across enough time to look like ordinary spending. The 2 names I didn't recognize were presumably accounts she controlled, and she had written in her own hand that if I became a problem, she would find other ways to handle it. He's already showing signs. Kevin had mentioned to me once, almost in passing, that Renee was worried about my memory, that she'd told him she'd noticed me repeating myself, losing things, getting confused. He'd said it gently, carefully, and I'd brushed it off. I was 67. I was sharper than I'd been at 40. But now I understood what that conversation had actually been. It was groundwork. It was the beginning of a story she was building about me, brick by careful brick, the story of a confused old man who couldn't be trusted, who needed to be managed, who should not be listened to if he started saying things that were inconvenient. What I didn't know, how far this had gone, whether Renee was acting alone, what she ultimately wanted, whether Kevin had any suspicion at all, what I needed to do. Everything right. Because here's what I've learned in 67 years. You only get one chance to catch a person like this. If you move too soon, you show your hand, and the evidence disappears. If you wait too long, the damage becomes irreversible. And if you are careless, if you are reactive and angry, and you charge in the front door the way every instinct in your body is screaming at you to do, you lose. You become exactly the confused, unreliable old man she has been building in the story. so I needed to be smarter than my anger. And I needed to do it without putting Danny in the middle. I spent the next week doing 4 things. First, I photographed every page of that notebook with my phone. Then I drove to a FedEx office and printed copies. I put the originals back in the blue tackle box exactly where I had found them, exactly how Danny had left them. Second, I called my accountant, a man named Gerald who I've known for 20 years, and asked him, hypothetically, what the warning signs of financial fraud inside a marriage looked like and what the process was for documenting it. Third, I reached out to a friend of mine from the engineering firm, a retired man named Harlan, who I knew had spent 10 years doing corporate fraud investigation before he got into infrastructure. I had munched with Harlan at a diner in Rockville, and I laid out what I had, and Harlan looked at the photocopied pages and said, very quietly, "Walter, this is serious." His name is Walter, by the way. That's me. Walter T. Briggs, retired civil engineer, grandfather, widower, and, as it turned out, the only person standing between my son's family and a woman who had been systematically dismantling it for over a year. The 4th thing I did was call Kevin. Not to tell him what I knew, not yet. I called and asked if I could take Danny for an extra weekend, and Kevin said of course, and I said I'd also love to have Kevin come for dinner one evening, just the 2 of us, the following week. Kevin said, "Sure, Dad. What's the occasion?" And I said I just miss having you around. He laughed and said, "Okay." I had 10 days. Harlan helped me understand what I was looking at. The notebook, he explained, appeared to be Renee's own tracking record, which told us 2 things. 1, she was meticulous and organized. 2, she felt safe enough in Kevin's house to keep written records, which meant she either didn't know about my workshop or didn't consider me a threat. The transfers were structured, always under $10,000, spread between 3 separate accounts, timed to coincide with periods when Kevin was busy at work or traveling. The names on the accounts turned out, with a little research that Harlan handled on his end, to belong to an LLC registered in Delaware 18 months ago, 3 months before Renee married Kevin, and a personal account in Renee's maiden name. She had planned this before the wedding. Harlan said, "She's done this before, Walter. The structure is too clean for a first attempt." I thought about that for a long time. Then I thought about Danny, 9 years old, who had somehow found that notebook, understood enough to be frightened, and made the decision to trust it to me. I thought about what it cost him to carry that secret. I thought about what it means when a child is so afraid of the adults in his home that he hides evidence in his grandfather's tackle box. I thought about Margaret, who would have known exactly what to do, and would have done it without hesitation. The dinner with Kevin was on a Thursday. I cooked pot roast, his favorite since childhood. I waited until after dinner, until we were sitting across from each other with coffee, and then I said, "Kevin, I need to show you something, and I need you to listen to all of it before you say anything. Can you do that?" To his credit, he didn't get defensive. He looked at my face, and whatever he saw there told him this was not the moment for defensiveness. He said, "Okay, Dad." I laid the photocopied pages on the table between us. I watched his face as he read them. I watched the confusion, the furrowing of his brow, the moment he recognized the account numbers, the moment the numbers registered, the moment he looked up at me with an expression I won't describe because it belongs to him. "How did you get this?" he said. I had thought carefully about this moment. I said, "It doesn't matter right now. What matters is whether any of this is news to you." He looked back down at the pages. He said, very quietly, "The transactions. I thought she said she was managing household expenses. I trusted her to." He stopped. $60,000. "At minimum," I said. "Harlan thinks the total is likely higher. There may be accounts we haven't found yet." Kevin was quiet for a long time. The pot roast sat between us, getting cold. Then he said, "She told me you were getting confused, Dad. She said she was worried about you." "I know," I said. He looked up at me. "I didn't entirely believe her," he said, and his voice broke slightly on the last word. "I didn't want to say anything because I didn't want to. I thought maybe I was being defensive about you. I thought maybe I was just—" He stopped again. "Then, I'm sorry." "You don't owe me an apology," I said. "You owe yourself one later. Right now I need you to focus." We talked for 3 hours. By the end of it, we had a plan. The plan had 3 requirements. 1, we needed Renee to either confess or make a documented admission. 2, we needed to protect Danny from any fallout. 3, We needed to move fast. Harlan had pointed out that if Renee sensed anything was wrong, she would likely move money and destroy records within hours. Kevin was the one who suggested the dinner. He said Renee had been talking about having me over. Part of the narrative she was building, he now understood. Keeping up appearances, keeping me close where she could manage me. He said he could arrange it for Saturday, 4 days away, and he could make sure Danny was at a friend's house for the evening. He said, "She's going to want to talk about you, Dad. About being concerned. She brings it up constantly. If she thinks I'm agreeing with her, she'll say more than she should." He knew his wife. That was the part that broke my heart a little. My son had been living in that house, paying attention, storing up observations he'd been too loyal or too hopeful to act on. He had noticed more than he'd let himself believe. I spent Friday with Harlan reviewing what we needed. I wore a simple recording device, legal in Maryland for one-party consent, and I rehearsed how to play confused without being obvious about it. I am not an actor, but I am an engineer, which means I understand systems, and what I was building that Saturday was a system designed to produce one specific output, the truth on record, from Renee's own mouth. Kevin picked me up at 4. On the drive over, neither of us said much. Renee met us at the door looking exactly as she always did. Composed, warm, that particular variety of warm that I now understood was performance. She hugged me, told me I looked well, brought me inside. The table was set nicely. There was wine. Everything was ordinary. We ate dinner, and Renee was charming, and Kevin was carefully, convincingly normal, and I played my part. A little slow on a couple of responses, repeating a detail about the pot roast I'd made Thursday, as if I'd forgotten I'd mentioned it, asking Kevin twice what day it was. Nothing dramatic, just enough to confirm the story she'd been telling. I watched her relax as the evening went on. After dinner, Kevin excused himself to make a phone call. We had arranged this, and Renee and I sat in the living room with our coffee. She leaned forward and said, in that particular gentle tone people use when they've decided they're being kind, "Walter, I hope you don't mind me saying Kevin and I have been talking about you. We're a little worried." "Worried?" I said. I kept my voice mild, slightly vague. "Just the memory things," she said. "Kevin mentioned you've been forgetting appointments, getting a little turned around sometimes." She paused. "Have you thought about seeing someone, a specialist? It would just be for peace of mind." I said. "I've been a little foggy." She smiled. It was a very careful smile. "It might be worth getting your affairs in order," she said. "While everything is still, while you're still in a position to make those decisions yourself. Kevin would be the natural person to help manage things. Your accounts, the house." There it was. "That makes sense," I said slowly. "Kevin's been so good." "He has," she said. Then, leaning forward slightly, "And honestly, Walter, it would make things easier for all of us. For his estate planning as well. There's a lot of financial moving around that needs to happen, and having everything consolidated," she caught herself just slightly and adjusted. "Having everything organized would just be so much simpler." The recording device in my breast pocket was doing its job. Kevin came back into the room then. He looked at me, and I gave him the smallest nod. He sat down across from Renee and said, very quietly, "Renee, I need to ask you something." She looked at him. "I need you to explain," he said, "why there's a Delaware LLC registered in your name that's received $62,000 from our joint accounts over the past 14 months. The room went very still. I watched her face. I watched the sequence, the split second of calculation, the attempt to find a path, the recognition that there wasn't one. She said, "Kevin," and then stopped. "I have the records," he said. "All of them." She looked at me then. Really looked at me, and I looked back at her steadily, and I think in that moment she understood exactly how confused I was not. The police were involved within the week. Harlan connected Kevin with a fraud attorney who described the case as unusually well documented. Renee's LLC was frozen. Her accounts were frozen. It turned out there had been a previous husband in another state, Ohio, and a similar pattern. She had gotten away with it that time. She did not get away with it this time. Kevin sat down with Danny the following weekend. He kept it simple, the way you have to with kids. He told Danny that Renee had done something wrong and that she wasn't going to be living with them anymore, and that it wasn't Danny's fault and that he was safe. Danny listened very carefully, and then he said, "I know, Dad. Grandpa took care of it. Kevin called me that night and told me what Danny had said, and I had to sit down for a moment. I have been taking care of things alone for a long time. Since Margaret died, it has just been me, figuring things out one step at a time, trying to be useful, trying to be present, trying to be the kind of father and grandfather who shows up when it matters. There are days when 67 feels very far from 35. There are days when the quiet of this house lands differently than it used to. But Danny pressed that note into my hand because he believed I could handle it. Because, despite everything, the narrative being built about confused old men who need to be managed, my grandson looked at me and saw someone who could be trusted with the truth. I thought about that note for a long time after everything was over. I thought about the cartoon cat on the pink notebook cover and a 9-year-old boy making the decision to act. The bravest person in this whole story was 31 inches shorter than me and still had a loose tooth. I keep the note in my desk drawer now. I take it out sometimes, not often, just when I need to remember something important. I think something bad is going to happen. I'm scared. Please don't tell them I told you. I love you. I love you too, buddy. And you were right. Something bad was going to happen, and together, we made sure it didn't. People talk about getting older like it's a process of subtraction. Like every year you lose a little more, a little speed, a little sharpness, a little relevance. Like eventually you become background scenery, someone to be managed and arranged and spoken for. What I know at 67 is that 67 years is a very long time to practice paying attention. To practice staying calm when everything in you wants to react. To practice being patient, being deliberate, being the person in the room who has seen enough to know that the loudest move is rarely the right one. Danny is doing well now. He's spending more time laughing again, the easy kind, the kind that doesn't have anything hidden underneath it. Kevin is working through it, slowly, honestly, the way he does everything. They're living in the house for now, just the two of them, and Kevin says it's both harder and better than he expected. I had Danny over last weekend. We worked on the model trains. We grilled burgers. We watched a Western that he still pretends to find boring. When Kevin came to pick him up Sunday afternoon, Danny hugged me the way he always has, both arms face pressed into my shoulder. But when he pulled back, he wasn't shaking. He looked up at me and grinned, gap-toothed and bright-eyed, and ran out to his dad's car. I stood on the porch and watched them drive away, and I thought, that's what it looks like when everything is going to be okay. If you are an older person watching this, and someone in your life is making you feel small, making you feel like your instincts can't be trusted, your memory can't be trusted, your judgment can't be trusted, I want you to hear this clearly. You have been paying attention for decades. That is not nothing. That is everything. Trust what you see. Trust what you know. And if a child ever presses a piece of paper into your hand and asks you to wait until they're asleep to read it, because sometimes the people with the clearest eyes in the room are the ones everyone else forgot to account for. I'm Walter Briggs. I'm 67 years old, and I am not done yet. There is a kind of justice that doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive loudly or all at once. It builds slowly, the way pressure builds behind a closed door, quietly, invisibly, until the moment comes when the door simply cannot hold anymore. That is what happened in this story. Not luck, not coincidence. Cause and effect, played out the way it always eventually plays out when one person chooses patience and another person chooses greed. Renee made her choices carefully and over a long period of time. She chose to enter a family under false pretenses. She chose to build a lie and reinforce it methodically, brick by brick. The confused old man, the forgetful grandfather, the aging obstacle who needed to be managed. She chose to take what wasn't hers and to plan, in writing, what would happen if anyone got in the way. Every one of those choices set the next one in motion. That is how it always works. The person who deceives must deceive again to protect the first deception. The person who steals must control more and more to prevent discovery. The architecture of a lie requires constant maintenance, and that maintenance always, eventually, creates the crack that brings the whole structure down. What brought it down here was not a surveillance system or a legal team or even the evidence in that blue tackle box. What brought it down was a 9-year-old boy who decided that telling the truth to someone he trusted was worth the fear it cost him. That kind of courage, quiet, private, costly, is the most underrated kind. Danny didn't have the vocabulary for what he was facing. He didn't have the power, or the legal standing, or the ability to act on what he knew. What he had was clarity and the wisdom to put that clarity in the right hands. That is not a small thing. That is everything. And Walter had something that Renee had systematically underestimated. He had decades of paying attention. He had the discipline to be still when every instinct said to move. He had the integrity to protect his grandson even when protecting his grandson meant going slowly, carefully, without shortcuts. The measure of a person's character is not what they do when it's easy. It is what they do when they are frightened, when they are angry, when they have every reason to react and choose instead to think. Walter chose to think. That choice is what made the difference between exposing the truth and losing it. This is what I believe after everything that happened. The qualities that protect us and the people we love are not dramatic. They are not loud. They are the daily practice of noticing what is real, of telling the truth even when it costs something, of staying steady when the ground shifts. Integrity is not a single heroic moment. It is the accumulation of 1,000 smaller moments of choosing honesty over convenience, patience over reaction, courage over comfort. Renee built her plan over 14 months of small, dishonest choices. Walter dismantled it over 10 days of small, honest ones. Danny is going to be okay. I know this not because everything turned out well, though it did, but because he already demonstrated at 9 years old the most important thing a person can know about themselves, that when it matters, they will tell the truth. That knowledge, once a person has it about themselves, does not go away. It grows, and I am 67 years old, and I am not done yet. Neither are you.